Hello and welcome back to our series on learning Google Apps Script for HR, brought to you by Prairie-HR-Solutions, where we believe knowledge should be shared and in empowering our fellow HR professionals in really rethinking how we deliver our HR services and solutions by utilizing tools that we probably already have at our disposal. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie-HR-Solutions, and in this video, I'd like to continue on with our HR admin interface. So we've created this sidebar interface for our sheet, and this sheet here is an employee database. And working with employee databases, you know that databases can become quite large, and we developed this sidebar here to assist us in interacting with this. Now, this sidebar is going to be limited because if we were to put all fields inside this sidebar here that would typically go in an employee database or an HRIS, then there would be a whole lot of scrolling. So when we get to that point, what we're going to do is actually take it and move it onto an actual web app itself to where it's an entire page. And we can render different views depending on what it is that we would like, with general information, salary information, an analysis, benefits, performance, etc. So the first thing in this video I would like to do is kind of clean up how this interface, this sidebar here, is interacting with the user. So you can see that up here we have this piece, not very professional. It's kind of just, So I want to delete that. And then what I want to do is create a pop-up of sorts that when this loads, it'll fire this pop-up, and then this pop-up will contain all of the instructions. And then that way we can get rid of this. And I think I want to repurpose this to where this here can actually be a notification box, to where when a notification is fired, it opens, it expands and is visible. And when it's not, it collapses and is hidden. Because if you notice right now, what we have is we have alerts that we've been using to see or to test our code to make sure functions were being called and fired. But when we call it, the notification is this kind of default notification. And anytime you use AppScript, if you just go the straight alert route, it's always going to have something like this, an embedded page, and then this long URL. So I'd like to clean that up and then just take this alert and have it in a hidden field that shows when it's needed and is hidden and doesn't take up space when it's not. So let's first go ahead and take care of this part right here. To do that, we have to think somewhat operationally and where things are coming from. So this, oh yeah, and it'll get rid of all this too. This found, it's breaking it up because that's what's being returned. But this UI is coming from our Google Apps side, our server side. And if we're wanting to create a pop-up instruction box, it should also be on the server side or that Google Apps Script side. Now this is all HTML, so we can handle this on our HTML side. So let's go ahead and head on over to our Google Apps Script side. Now, when we were getting that sidebar, we were using this function right here, this functions show sidebar. And the way we were doing that was we were using the spreadsheet app within Google. We were getting the UI, and then we were showing that sidebar. And then the sidebar was in the form of this variable here. So we're going to do the same type of piece here. And we want it to actually render or populate after the sidebar. So first, let's create another variable here. And let's call this variable notification, I suppose. And in this notification, we are going to be using this HTML service HTML service. Now, instead of creating an HTML output from file, which is this file right here, which is our sidebar HTML file, we're not going to create it from a file. We are just going to simply create an HTML output. So we'll type in create. Let's find it. Create HTML output. There it is. And in this output, this HTML output needs an HTML. And that HTML is going to be in the form of a string. Once it's rendered, the string becomes, it reads the HTML with inside the string. That's the best way to think about it. So since it's going to be a string, or it needs to be a string, and to show what I'm talking about here, if we go over here, expand on this little arrow, you'll see that it is +2 overloads. Okay, that doesn't really help explain really anything. Okay, thought it would give a description. Guess not. But it needs to be in the form of a string. So in our string, there we go. Now, as you can see, it's populating up create HTML, and then it shows HTML in the form of a string. Perfect. And then you can have somewhat of a example here that's B, which is bold, hello world, and then it ends at tag, but it's in quotations. So in this, just for now, just to give us something, let's create an H3 tag, and then we will say, welcome to the HR admin interface. Now, this isn't necessarily the title. This is just that first line. And then what we'll do is we will simply just end this H3 tag just to populate something. We'll close that with a semicolon. So now that we have this stored in a variable, let's use that variable. And we're going to do the same thing that we did for the sidebar because it's a UI item. We're doing something to the UI. We're declaring the spreadsheet first. Then we need to get the UI. And then that UI, what we want to do is show not an alert, not a prompt. Now, a prompt and an alert, they kind of do the same thing initially, but a prompt is asking the user to do something else, like type something in or acknowledge. We don't want that. We don't want to show the sidebar. What we want to do is show this modal dialog. That's actually what we want, and that's going to be a method, so it takes some stuff. And it's going to take two pieces. One, it's going to need the user interface in the form of an object. Well, we created that. We created that by this HTML output, and we stored it in a variable. So the first piece of information we're going to need is a notification, and it's separated by a comma here. And then we're going to need a title in the form of a string. So that title is going to be what's on the very, very top of the modal. And let's just call this admin interface. Something simple like that. Okay, good. So now when we save this, we go back to our sheet, and then we refresh our sidebar, we should have something. There it is. We have something pop up. HR admin interface. That is our title that we set after the spreadsheet app.getUI. And then this is our first line here within our HTML. So this piece right here that I just highlighted, this welcome to HR admin interface, that is our HTML. So just like with our sidebar takes HTML inside of it, but the actual frame and the title is Google Apps Script. So let's go ahead and finish our instructions. Now, I'm not going to have you guys sit here and, watch me type out instructions because that's just silly. I went ahead and populated something here. And so these are the instructions, and this is what we will be populating or showing inside that HTML box. You'll notice that this tag right here, this BR, is a hard return. It's a break. So you can have a single break, or in this case, you can have two breaks, which sort of separates the lines. And then this P tag here is simply a paragraph. It's just declaring that this is going to be a paragraph. So now let's go ahead and save it. And then we'll go back to our sheet. Let's close that out. And let's refresh the sidebar and see what we have. Okay, perfect. So now we have a pop-up box that loads initially and has a set of instructions, and you guys will have this code, so please just feel free to change this however you want, if you choose. So what we can do now is get rid of this and start working on this notification so we're not popping up this thing. So let's go back over to our HTML. So now we want to get rid of all of this. And initially what I'll do is I will create another button. Oh, that's an off color. First thing we're going to do is change this gray to match that. That'll be a simple fix. But what I also want to do is create a button here initially to show the alert and how it's collapsing and hiding, and then how it's becoming a visible block. So first let's change this button because that's picking at me. So let's go up here to our style. Let's create a new style piece here. First, we're going to need this button. So this button is a class of BTN. So let's just grab that class. Since it's a class, we have a period. Again, I don't want to turn this too much into a CSS, but if you want me to, please just let me know and I'll do another video. So that button, what the color that we're wanting to change isn't the background itself, it's the background when we hover. So what we'll have to do is what's called a pseudo class, and that, or a pseudo, and that's hover. And then what we're going to do is we are simply just going to copy this line here. We'll copy that too, just where it's consistent throughout. Now we'll save this. I see it took me a long time to get my screen shared. I apologize about that. So this is the class that we're selecting. This is the pseudo for that class. It's essentially it's when we hover, that's when we want to trigger this. And then what we did is we simply copied the CSS from our input group to make it match and be consistent. Okay, so now we'll go back. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. It seems like I'm getting a lag on my sharing. So now let's refresh this. You'll see that nothing really changed until we hover it. There we go. Now it matches. So that's just a simple fix, and it keeps me from having heartburn every time I look at it. Okay, so now let's go down here and create another button. And we'll put that button here because we're going to delete it anyway. We'll copy that, put another button here. It's not going to have an ID. And the reason it's not going to have an ID is because instead of having, I'm going to show you guys a different way to make a button do something. So here, for this process button, we were using the add event listener to where when a user clicked, then it would run a function. So since this is, I do like doing it this way, but since this is just a demonstration that's a placeholder really, I'll show you a different way we can do it in line. on the button itself. And how we can do that is simply on click, which is saying when this button is clicked, we want to run a function. And then you put this function here. So let's just call this toggle for now. So when this button here is clicked, it's going to run this function toggle. Well, we don't have that toggle, and we don't have anything to toggle right now. We'll change this here to just toggle too, so it's not confusing. Okay, so let's make what it's going to toggle. Now these divs, see this whole div right here? This is kind of this div is a section or a block of code. So you can wrap anything within a div. So what I want to do is let's just delete this. We don't need it anymore. And let's create a div. We'll make our comment here. This is going to be notification block. So now when we encapsulate something inside of a div, you need what we're encapsulating, of course. So this input, if you remember our employee number, it's just this thin bar. So our notification would be limited to the size of this bar. So that's not very helpful at all. I would rather do this notes piece. So let's go down here and find out where the notes is and use this text area. Let's grab this text area down here in front of our notes, go up, and we will paste that in here, right here. So now it's not going to be an ID of rec notes. It's going to be an ID of, let's call it notification block. So when you have any element within HTML, its default is shown and taking up space. So as you type it, when you type it, you save it, you go back and you refresh it, you're going to see it and it's going to take up space. So that's default. And what that would look like is essentially an inline style, CSS style, and it looks like this. So that is the default, and what it's saying is the CSS style of the display is set to block. That's the best way to think about it. And let's just change this to notification block. Okay, so now we have our text area. So let's save this and then go see what we actually have. Make sure this transfers over. There it is. Okay, so now as you can see, we have our block. Maybe put another line up here. So that is set to display block. It's taking up space and it's viewable. So now what I would like us to do is, instead of setting this to display block where it's visible and takes up space, I would like to set this to none. Then we'll save this, go back over, and you'll see taking up space, visible, right here. Now when we reopen the sidebar, you'll notice that it's not there, not visible, and it's not taking up space. That's what we want. And what we want to be able to do is when we go down here and click this button, we want a function to run to toggle that block and none off. And it's very simple, and it's actually a very handy JavaScript code. So I'm going to make sure that I use this so you all will have it at your for your availability and reference. So let's go up here, and this was called toggles. So let's create that function. So now what we first want to do is we want to get the block by its ID. This ID right here. So let's go up and grab this ID, and we'll grab the element by that ID. Let's store it in a variable. Let's just call this notification. No, let's call this notification box. And then this notification box, we want to select our document, get element by ID. There's our ID. Now we don't want our value of this because it really doesn't have a value. We just want to focus our code to it and store it in a variable. So essentially this variable, when we call this variable, it is telling our code to look at that box because you're getting ready to do something with it. So to change or toggle that style display to either block or none, we can do a simple if statement. So we can check to see if the style display is set to none, and if it is, we just switch it to block. If it's set to block, then we just switch it to none. So let's create that if statement. If notification box dot style dot display is strictly equal to, we'll say none, then what we want to do is we want to set the notification box style display to block. And then we need an else. So else, and you can play with this. Once you start getting a lot of divs that are being toggled on and off, you'll have to think about, okay, what is the style display set at? Because what you may have to do is ensure that you're checking the right thing and not unnecessarily calling it or missing it, so to speak. So else, we want to set the notification box style display to none. So there we go. Now we should be able to go back after we save. Okay, let's go back here. Wait for our tag, our page to share. There we go. Now when we open our sidebar and we press toggle, see how it's none, not visible, not taking up space. And we toggle it, visible, taking up space. Toggle. There we go. Now what we can do, now that we have that JavaScript function built out, instead of having this button to manually push it, we can call that function every time that we wanted to have an alert. So anytime that we have an alert pop up like this, we can call that function and then take the contents of that alert and put it in here. So the one thing that we are going to need to do is let's give this a tab or a span. Now, I don't think we should put the span on the side like this. I'd rather just have it up on top. So let's go back. We'll go down and grab a span from our previous text box so we don't have to recreate it. Here we go. Now, the reason I'm only selecting this, well, here, actually, I'll show this. Just copy all this, and then I'll show you what that input group does. Because that input group is a built-in class through Bootstrap. And that input group, essentially, through CSS, sets the span on the side. And I'll show you what I mean here. We don't want this piece here, what we could do is simply grab this, put this up here in our div, and then we just get rid of this div. Make sure we have our divs all situated. Yep. Okay, so when we save this now, instead of putting notes, let's put, I don't know, let's just put notice. You can change this to whatever you want, but just do notice. No, that's kind of harsh. There we go. Just put that information. Now when we go back over here and refresh our sidebar, you'll notice that the information's up here and it's disappeared. Okay, so that's still visible because the reason why it's still visible is because the div is actually the wrong place. See how we have the ID notification block on the text area? That is the only thing that it's actually blocking out. So we don't want this style display none set on the text area. We want it actually set on our div, this entire piece. And this ID notification block should not be here. This notification block ID should be up here because the ID should be the entire div, not just the text area. Now this text area is where we're going to be populating. So instead of notification block, let's do notification text. So now we have this entire block with a notification block ID, and the entire block is set to none. So now let's go back over here. My mistake. That was a quick little oversight there. So now instead of this being visible all the time, the entire block is gone. And then when we hit toggle, then it goes. Now see how this piece up here, this information, see how it's kind of taking all the way over and then it just looks kind of cruddy. Okay, let's save this. So the reason for that ugly little thing is this default class right here. We would have to set the width of that text box, but it's this input group that is actually setting this input group text. So when we get rid of that on the div and then save and then go back to our tab here, refresh it, and now toggle it, you'll see that the information bar up top is up top, not on the side. And then we have all of this to play around with and give ourselves an alert. So good. So now let's change this to actually run this function instead of on this toggle. Let's run this function on at times when we will run this alert. So instead of having this alert unavailable here, let's just run that function and then we can put unavailable. So let's go back here, let's share, and we'll go down to our first alert. Share that, there we go, it's visible. So we won't need this button. We will need this process. So let's change this to notification toggle. And then the other thing that we are going to need to grab is our text area. Because if we're going to populate anything inside our text area, we are going to need to grab that ID. And that ID is notification text. So what we can do here is we can set another variable. And this is going to be notification text. Oops, forgot a parentheses. Okay, perfect. So now what would happen is, let's just say we do notification text. And what we're saying is we want this box to show. Actually, we should do the order correctly. We want to populate the text prior. And let's just set the value of that text box variable to, we'll just do test for now, just so you can see what's going on with it. Because it's going to grab this and then it's going to populate in this field. Because when you think about text boxes, you can type in here. But the great thing about HTML is you can also populate. That's what we're going to do. And you remember, by populating, we were able to populate by retrieving a record. So it's the same thing. So let's go ahead and open it. Now remember, the text area itself is within that div. So it's not visible right now. It's only visible when we toggle it. Missing something. And the reason it's not working is because we changed the function. And the reason I changed this function was because we are going to use it in a different way, and I'd like it to be permanent. So there we go. So it was calling a function that didn't exist. So now when we go back here, refresh our sidebar, close out our instructions. Now when we hit toggle, you'll see it's populating that. And that's what we want. So now every time we do an alert, instead of having the value equal to test, we can have the value equal to anything we want. So let's go ahead and set this up. We don't need this piece. We could do is go down here to our alert. Now we don't want it to set that alert there. What we want it to do is first populate this. Notification text value, we don't want to do this. We want to put this as unavailable. And then once this box has unavailable set, then we want to run this notification toggle. So we go down here, and then we simply want to run that function. So let's go ahead and get rid of this notification text because it's not going to need it. So now we'll save it. And then go back over to our sheet. And then we'll refresh. Okay, now instead of getting this alert box up here, we can leave it blank here because it's going to search for any of these names. And if it doesn't have this name in the box, then it's going to populate that unavailable. So when we just simply hit process, and there we go, information unavailable. Now, in order to get this to go away, because it finished its function, in order to get this to go away, you can either hit process again, of course, which is not really helpful. What we can do is set this up on a timer. And what I'll do is I'd like to end this video here. And the next video we will take and set this up on a timer to where it'll do 3 seconds and then automatically run that function again and close it. And then we'll also get rid of this toggle button. So I hope this has been helpful and look forward to seeing you the next video. And until then, please take care.